You have heard the instruction. You have known for a while, what you were um, called to do. Maybe it came during your quiet time. Maybe it came through a pattern that you just cannot unsee. Maybe it has been sitting in the back of your spirit for months, and you have been doing what most high capacity women do. You have kept building, you kept producing, you kept showing up, and you have been exhausted in a way that has absolutely nothing to do with your calendar. That is not burnout. That is the weight of an instruction you have not yet moved on. So today we are going to talk about why. So, welcome back. I am Shelby Frederick, also known as Lady Jules, and in this space where high capacity women are moving from freeze to faithful execution. So, we welcome you. Today's episode is called The Real Price of Obedience No One Talks About. And I want to be honest with you from the beginning. This one is very personal. We spend a lot of time in this space talking about systems, execution maps, decision frameworks, and all of that matters. But none of it works if the foundation is disobedience. So here is what we are doing today. First, I'm going to walk you through a specific season in my own life, what God asked me to release, what it cost me to say yes, and what I had to grieve before I could build again. And then I'm going to hand you the exact system I developed on the other side of that obedience. This is the one that makes hearing God's voice consistent, not just possible in a crisis, but repeatable in the ordinary. So, this is not motivation. This is a practical episode. So, if you're ready, let's go ahead and get into it. A few years ago, I was in a situation that looked successful on the outside, had good relationships, predictable income. It was a version of myself I had spent years building. It was the credentials, the reputation, the positioning, the kind of life that reads well on paper. And God told me to walk away from it, not from everything, but from one specific thing. But that one thing was tied to my income, my identity, and some of the most important relationships in my life at that time. I heard it clearly. That steady, quiet peace, the kind that does not panic, it does not rush, but it asks something of you. And so I sat with it. I sat with it. And then I moved. And I want to be honest with you about what happened next. It cost me relationships. People who had been in my life for years did not understand the move. Some of them did not stay. And that was the hardest part. Not the loss of the thing itself, but the loss of the people attached to it. When you make a move that requires faith, not everyone can follow you there. It even cost me income. There was a season where the financial gap between where I left and where I was going, it felt so wide. It was so uncomfortable. And I had to trust the instructions more than the spreadsheet that I was looking at. And that is not a statement that I make lightly. You see, I build systems for a living. I believe in the data, the structure, and execution maps. But there are seasons where the only column that matters is what God said. It even cost me an identity, that version of myself that I had spent years building because it was tied to that season. Letting go of that season meant letting go of who I had become inside of it. And that kind of loss, it does not get talked about enough. We talk about the losing of income, the position, the relationship, but we do not talk enough about losing the version of yourself that those things built. You see, that identity loss is quiet, but it's also very heavy, and it requires its own kind of grief. But here's what I need you to know, that on the other side of that obedience, every relationship that God allowed to remain, it actually became stronger. The income came back. It was in a different form, but it was with a different ceiling. And the identity I rebuilt from that release season became the one I was actually supposed to carry. You see, obedience is rarely explainable until after the fact. So it will cost you the thing that you are holding on to. And I'm here to tell you that that's not punishment, it's the process, it's the release. That release is part of the preparation. So when I came out of that season, I had one priority. I needed a practice that made hearing God's voice consistent, not just possible in crisis, but repeatable everyday life. What I built is called the Still Small Voice System. It's 5 phases, it's a daily practice, but the foundation underneath everything else I build. So let me go ahead and walk you through it. Phase one is what I call stillness. You have to create space to hear. That's being in the same spot at the same time. No phone, 10 to 20 minutes, and just one question: Lord, what do you want me to know today? One question, that's it. That is, so very important. And it is the most important question and conversation that I can have, you know, every single morning at that same time and in that same space. And what do you do after you ask the question? You wait. And most people skip this phase because it feels unproductive. That is exactly why they struggle to hear clearly when it matters most. You see, stillness is not passive, it is your highest leverage activity of the day. When your spirit is clear, everything you build from it is stronger. Now, phase two is discernment. You identify what you heard. So you write everything down. You label each thought. Is it fear, logic, peace? Fear, it always sounds urgent. It is like catastrophic because it keeps you stuck and it makes you feel busy. Now, logic sounds reasonable and it will give you 1,000 good reasons to stay comfortable. But peace, it sounds quiet. It doesn't rush you, it asks something of you. And so here's the test: is this steady or panicked? Is this growing me or protecting me? Does this require faith or just effort? And you keep what carries peace. That's phase two. Now, phase three is what I call stewardship. Stewardship. Stop sharing what God told you before you move on it. When God gives you an instruction, most people do one of two things. They dismiss it because it does not make sense yet, or they share it with everyone until other people's opinions dilute what they heard. In both responses, it cost you. So write it exactly as you heard it. Always put a date on it. I even put a time on it. Do not over explain it. Do not crowdsource it. What God gives you privately deserves to be stewarded privately until you have a clear next step. Now, phase 4 is obedience. And this is where you act on what you was given. One step, 24 hours. You release what needs to go. This is where most people stall. And it's not because they did not hear, but because they are waiting to feel ready. And let me say this as clearly as I know how to say it. Feeling ready is not the signal, peace is the signal. One step in the next 24 hours. That is all. When you release what God told you to release, the static clears. And what comes next, it becomes easier to hear because you are no longer managing the weight of disobedience. Now, phase 5 is what I call rhythm. Rhythm is what you repeat daily, not just in crisis, not just when you're in transition, but every single day. You build consistency until hearing God's voice becomes as natural as breathing. Most people only get still when everything falls apart, and then they wonder why it is so hard to hear. They are asking God to speak through their loudest, most activated, most fearful season with zero practice and no baseline. And I'm here to tell you that is not a prayer problem. That is a practice problem because stillness builds trust. Discernment will build your clarity. Rhythm builds the kind of confidence that does not require external validation to take the next step. I told you, obedience cost me relationships, income, and an identity. But here is what it gave me back: relationships that can actually hold the weight of who I am actually becoming. It gave me income that is not capped by a structure I was never supposed to stay in. And it gave me an identity that is not built on what I produce, it is built on who I am before I produce anything. None of the systems I build, the wellness frameworks, the business structures, the AI tools, none of them work if the foundation is disobedience. So everything I build now, it starts with what I hear in stillness first. So faith leads, wellness grounds it, systems multiply it. So the question is not whether obedience costs something, because it always does. The real question is whether what God has for you is worth the price. And I'm here to tell you that it is. You already know what He has been telling you. You have known it for a while. So the question is not whether you heard it, the question is whether you are going to move. And here is where to start. First, I have a free guide called the Stillness Reset. It's 10 minutes, 5 pages, the exact system I just walked you through. Comment still down in the comments and I will send it to you directly. Second, if you are in the middle of a season like the one I described, where you have heard the instruction, but you're still holding on, that is exactly what this season shift intensive is built for. It's 90 minutes, one framework. That's the DDB. You've heard me talk about it. Discern, dismantle, build. One clear next step for your specific situation. This is not a course, it is not a group program. It's one conversation that changes the direction of your execution. The link is going to be in the bio and in the comments. And if you need consistent community and structure while you rebuild, the Rebuild and Rise community is where that happens. So start tomorrow, same spot at the same time. And I want you to come back and tell me what you heard. I am Shelby Frederick. This is where you move from freeze to faithful execution. I will see you next week. Blessings.
If this question reflects your current leadership season, pause and notice your response. Nothing is wrong with you. This points to capacity, not character. This is the work I support inside my private DDB breakthrough coaching cohorts, structural support and sustainable change. If this pattern keeps repeating, deeper support matters. Thank you for spending this time with me. We rebuild first, then we rise.